Can you hear me? Anyone?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we'll wait a few minutes, give people a chance to join up. I'll be right back. Okay, almost ready. Let's see, we got 26 people here. It's good. Couple more minutes. Let some others arrive. All right, so before I start recording and we really get into it, while we're waiting for a few more to get here, I take it you've all been able to get the book or a copy of some sorts, and you've been reading through the first part of the Metamorphosis. So, questions, observations, comments? How'd we find it? Anyone?
Oh, interesting.
You did find it interesting. It's a little strange, no?
Yeah, it is strange, but it's like I would like want to go on forward and reading this.
Well, great. By all means, feel free to jump ahead of our schedule and read through the whole story as quickly as you can. Ideally, that'll give you the opportunity to go back and reread the whole thing, or at least sections of it. That's always a great advantage if you have the time to do it. So by all means, anyone who wants to plow ahead and get ahead of our reading schedule, by all means do so. Yeah.
When reading, when
Sorry.
reading, sorry, um, when reading the story, I was kind of questioning some of the details, such as the portrait of the woman with the fur.
Hmm.
I was really questioning why we needed that detail and why was he attached to it.
Okay. Now that I really like that. All right. That shows that you're being attentive to the details. Now keep in mind, since if you've only read the first part, um, questions that you may be having, such as the one you just posed, might be, could be, probably will be addressed in some manner by the time you get to the end of the story. But as you're reading it, to make those types of observations, well, what's the significance of this? You try to see if is something that tells you that significance in the readings that you've done up to this point. And if not, that's something that you want to put down in the book, in the margin, or in a notebook, or index cards, however you're taking notes while you read. And then you want to be asking yourself, because if you end up asking that question at this point and you get to the end of the story and you're still not sure, you know, what was the significance of that? Well, that's the type of thing that we want to discuss. Remember, there's a lot of ambiguity here. All right, and you'll find this in all the texts that we're exploring. Things are not clear cut, and we certainly get that sense in a story like the Metamorphosis, because we have this fantastical element to it, right? This is not realism, so to speak, in its purest sense by any stretch of the imagination. And we get that right at the beginning. And that alerts us, right? That conditions us to be expecting the unusual. And that means that we need to think a little bit outside the box, right? So with something like, what is the significance of that picture he observes at the very beginning? And we're not really given much information as to why that might be significant. So but we want to be thinking about that as we read. We want to be looking for that when we start reading the next sections. That, and among other things, right? Remember, the beginning of any story, any work of literature, is laying a foundation. Right? We're being introduced to characters, so we get to know the characters. We're going to watch how these characters evolve and develop. And that's very important in this story, okay? And we're going to be seeing references and symbols and symbolism and all kinds of things that we're alerted right from the beginning that are going to be strange. And we want to try to put the pieces together to see what issues are being addressed here, and there are many. Right? And we want to be asking ourselves, why are these issues being addressed in this way? So, yeah, I mean, that we may not get concrete, absolute answers to many things. And we're going to have to then draw our conclusions based on the evidence we have at our disposal from the text, and then say, you know, based on this, and this, the most likely conclusion I can draw based on the evidence is this. Recognizing that it's open to interpretation, but you always want to marry that interpretation to the evidence, facts that we have from the text itself. And it's challenging. And these are challenging texts we're looking at. Other observations, questions?
About the fact that the writer perceives our character as a cockroach, a giant cockroach. At first I thought it was supposed to be a symbolism or a metaphor, but as he gets out the room and just walks out, apparently he really is a giant cockroach, and I'm just a bit kind of wrap my head around it.
Oh, you and me both. Yeah, no, I mean, that's one of the really powerful elements of the story. I mean, it's not subtle, right? I mean, the description is very detailed in terms of his legs and his back. And I mean, this is, I mean, remember, we're reading a translation. And in the edition that we have, and you're going to see, because I'm going to be putting up we're going to be looking at the text, but it's not the same translation as we have in the book that I ordered. I can't put that up for copyright reasons. Okay, it's one of the things we have to navigate through when we're doing this long distance reading, because obviously if we were in the classroom, we'd be just reading from the book that we all have. But yes, I mean, in the edition that we have, he's changed into a monstrous cockroach. Other interpretations, as you'll see from the one that we're looking at, say vermin, bug. It's not specifically cockroach. The translation is predicated on the description. And in the German, and I'm not proficient in German, it's not specifically a cockroach, but it is something bug-like. I mean, really strange, and it's in those details that we get a sense of, I guess, the monstrosity of it all. So, yes, I mean, if you can speak German and you're so inclined, by all means, get the original version and read it in German. That would be ideal. You'd actually be able to, probably enlighten us quite a bit. I mean, it's one of the problems with translations, because translation is not just dealing with exact translation of words. It also has to capture the essence and the sense and the tone of the original. So there's a lot of flexibility in translations. That's why there's multiple translations of this story, and there are telling differences. Okay, we have to work with the best we have, and we're basically, because I can't put this edition up on the screen, we're going to be looking at two translations, and that could be an interesting exercise in noting the differences and what that can suggest. Right? Translators always bring in a certain element of interpretation to their translation, and we have to be wary of that. Okay. All right. So there's a question about the books. If you weren't here in the first class, you do want to read through the outline carefully. You'll see what books we have, and you'll see the sequence in which we're reading the books. Okay, the books are available at the TAV main office. Okay, so if you have any questions about that, go through the course outline. And if you still have questions, then just ask me. Okay. Anything else before? Because what we're going to do, I think I mentioned this last week. I'm big on detailed, close reading. Right, and that's what we're going to be doing, certainly with the Kafka and with all the other texts. But then once we get familiar, once we have our confidence in terms of our ability to read closely, recognize symbolism, be attentive to all the elements of the text that are relevant, and everything is relevant on some level, then we can branch out a bit, start theorizing and looking at multiple layers of possible meanings.
I have a question.
Yes.
I found the PDF online. Is that accurate?
Depends on which translation you have. Do you know the name of the translator?
No, I'm not sure. It says no.
No? Okay. Well, it'll be interesting, because when I put up the one that I have, you can see if it's the same one. If not, yeah, I mean, this is, again, something that I'm anticipating. Some of you, it's more difficult to get to the bookstore, and you may have a different translation. Normally, that would be much more of a challenge from my perspective, but under our circumstances, we'll navigate through it. And it'll be interesting if you do have a different translation that you should bring up if it's seemingly radically different than what we're looking at. And that might be something that would be a very interesting talking point. All right, so you have what you have, and every translation out there should be valid. Of course, depending where you got it. Okay.
Also, was there a reading for today?
Yes, we were supposed to be reading the first part.
So which one
Well,
is that?
it should be broken down in the every edition that I've seen. You'll see about 15, 20 pages in, there'll be a big break, and then it should say part 2. Okay. In our edition, and you'll see the one that I have up on the screen, that I'll be bringing up on the screen. In our edition, it starts on page 75, and then when you get to page 91, you can see clearly there's a big break, and it says 2. All right. So if you're not using the book that I ordered, you need to be attentive because we're reading it in parts. There's 3 parts. Today, we are going to be going over part 1. And for next week, you are expected to have read part 2. And obviously, the next week after that, part 3. Okay? Again, yes.
Yes, I'm just interrupting because I also found a PDF form online.
Okay.
And the translation is done by Joyce Creek. It's Oxford Words Classics. Yeah, Joyce Creek. Yeah.
Joyce Creek. Okay, so it looks like we're gonna have multiple translations that you'll be dealing with. So again, that's for those of you who have the other translations. I mean, the key here is to be attentive and to try to, recognize when we're dealing with a section on the one that I'm going to be putting up on the screen, and how that meshes with the one that you have. So you should have that in front of you. All right, and I'll give you time to maybe look and see and let us know if things seem to be translated differently. All right, but it should be okay. The gist of the story, the essence of the story will be there. All right, and I'm going to ask those of you who have these PDFs once we get started. I'm curious to see how they describe his transformation at the very beginning as a giant cockroach or as vermin or as a beetle. These are all different ways it's been translated, okay? Do we have a quiz today on the book? Yes, we do. Okay, so if you are behind in the reading, then I strongly suggest you be very attentive to the class, okay? Because you are gonna have a quiz based on part 1, okay? Other
I'm
questions?
sorry, this is my first class
Okay.
today. And like I was in Gary's class in the morning, Monday. So I just shipped to this class. So can you just tell me about the books and readings and
Okay.
all?
So what I'll do, since before we get started in the text, and let me pull up the outline and just look at some of the key elements there. I know this is repetitive for those of you here at our last class, but we seem to have a number of people who weren't. So very briefly, okay, we all see this on the screen?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So again, you go through this yourself. It should be fairly clear. As you can see, here's the sequence by how we're reading. We have three classes on the Metamorphosis broken down into those 3 parts, right? Then we're transitioning to Billy Budd. We're going to be spending 4 classes on Billy Budd. I'll be talking more about the page numbers, like how we're reading. I'll be making that clear once we get there. Then we're transitioning into James Joyce, mainly concentrating on the dead. And I'm going to try and get Araby in there as well.
Okay, and from where I can get these books?
The books are available at the TAV office. Okay.
Okay.
All right. They've been ordered.
Cafe Center or TAV office?
Right at the main office. Okay. So these are the required readings. Right. We have the Franz Kafka, the Metamorphosis. That's the one you want to get as soon as possible because that's what we're dealing with now. Okay, then we have the Billy Budd and Other Tales, and then James Joyce's Dubliners. Again,
Okay.
these books are available at the TAV office. They're also, you know, if it's inconvenient to go there, they're readily available at most bookstores, Chapters, Indigo, or secondhand bookstores.
Okay.
Okay.
And how many pages we have to read every week?
It depends. You should anticipate, you know, 20, 25. In the case of Metamorphosis, I think each section is about, what, 15, 20 pages, something along those lines.
Okay.
All right, and I'll try to keep that consistent when we get to the other books to not overload you, to try to keep the reading to about no more than 25 pages along those lines. By all means, feel free to read ahead if you have the time, but that's what you should anticipate. Okay, so you can do your time management accordingly. Okay. Yeah, so again, another edition that you may have. Yeah, I think it's going to be okay. I'm not familiar with that particular edition, but you'll have a good sense today. If you're having difficulty following from your edition to what we're looking at, or the one that I've ordered, just let me know. We'll figure something out, but it should be okay. All right. Other questions? No? Okay. All right, so we're going to get started. I noticed that it seems to automatically start recording as soon as we come in. Okay. So again, just to remind you how the class, especially for those of you who weren't here last class, the way we're proceeding is we're going to go for about an hour and a half. Then we're going to take a break, half-hour break, thereabouts. Then we come back and we go straight through till around 12. All right, so rather than having a number of different smaller breaks spread out throughout the class time, we have the one lengthy break. So we're basically splitting the class up into 2 hour-and-a-half long sessions. And you know, that's pretty much how I do it when I'm in the classroom. And I think that is probably the better way to proceed here, because it's a long time to be sitting and staring at a screen. I can promise you it's challenging for me, because you, like most of my classes, no one turns on their cameras, so I'm not even seeing faces, which is, you know, challenging for me, because I don't know what's working and what's not working, or if you're following along. So I need you to be able to give me some feedback. That's why I'll be pausing frequently, asking if there are questions, and we have the chat option. So utilize that, because I have no way of knowing how you're responding if I can't see you, and that's why I miss the classroom so very much. All right, but we have to deal with what we have to deal with. All right. Good. We're ready to look at the text. All right, let's call it up. Okay, so again, it's the translation I have here is not the translation that I ordered. So that also speaks to those of you who have different translations as well, but we have to work through it, all right? So anytime for all the texts that we're gonna be looking at, the first thing we look at always is the title, right? Title is alerting us to something, always. So the title of this story is called Metamorphosis. What is that? What does that mean? Anyone? If you're not sure, you can look it up.
Metamorphosis is a change of like one form to another, but that's normally it doesn't resemble like from the one form to another. For example, from pupa to the adult.
Yep. Okay, good, thank you. If you didn't know what the word metamorphosis meant when you started reading this, you need to look it up. Okay, you're going to encounter, especially when we get to Melville, you are going to encounter words that you are unfamiliar with. And it's very important to get into the habit of looking the words up. Goes without saying, especially with something as important as a title. Because that's the first thing we see. That's what we first encounter. It's telling us something, it's preparing us, it's laying down a framework that will engage us in a way that we will be looking for certain things when we start reading. Okay, sometimes it's very basic and simple, other times it's a little more complex. With the Billy Budd, it's pretty straightforward. It's a title, Billy Budd is the main character, and so on. Here we have metamorphosis. Well, what does that mean? We want to know. So it means transformation of some kind, change. So that tells us before we start reading that we're going to be looking, something's going to be changing here. What's it going to be? That's before we even read the first word. And you'll see with Joyce, his titles, are extraordinarily significant. Okay, it's to get us to start thinking. Remember, we're looking at literature, we're looking at art. All right, this is not, these are not scientific texts, this is not math. We're challenged to be able to see things from different perspectives and approach things related to the human condition from angles that we may not be familiar with. It may seem a bit strange. We want to ask ourselves why and what are we getting at here? All right. So, metamorphosis. Now we know we're going to be looking for a change. We're wondering, okay, when's that change going to come up? What's that change going to entail? In this case, we get it right off the bat. One morning, when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into, in this translation, a horrible vermin. In our translation for the book, it's a cockroach. That's exactly what it is. Into a monstrous cockroach. Horrible vermin, monstrous cockroach. Anyone have a translation that has a different description? No?
Mine says monstrous insect.
Monstrous insect. As I told you, there are the translation, because the German word, and this is again secondhand, I get this because I don't read German, but is the way he describes it in the original. It's not specific. That's why the translations have different, and I think that's very intentional. It's meant to be a little ambiguous, but it's something really disturbing that we can certainly recognize. Okay. All right. He found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin. Now, you're going to note, and those of you who've had me before, you know how I proceed with this. I really parse everything. Now, we're not going to be able to read the whole text together. Obviously, that we won't have time for that. But I want to direct you towards a method of reading that I hope you'll get into the habit of doing. So, in this one sentence, what do we learn? What's revealed to us? Remember, everything at the beginning is laying a foundation. Everything's going to grow out of what we are exposed to at the beginning. That's why the beginning is so important. Can't gloss over it, because so much will be relatable and will relate back to what we are discovering here in these first few pages. So we know a number of things by looking at this first sentence, right? We know what time it is. It's morning. We know a character's name. Do we know that this is the main character? We can't know that yet. But we know that we have a Gregor Samsa. We know that it's morning. We know that he's waking up. And we know that he was having troubled dreams. The key here is the word troubled, right? We want to take note of this because it is speaking to the character of Gregor Samsa. He's having troubled dreams. That suggests what? Suggests that maybe he's troubled. Usually when we have troubled dreams, it's because we're troubled in some way. And all that is, normal. We have all had troubled dreams. We wake up in the morning. But then immediately, he found himself transformed. Really, it's up to here, the metamorphosis. In his bed into a horrible vermin or a monstrous cockroach or an insect, whatever. That's the first sentence. That is telling us, again, it's morning, Gregor Samsa, troubled dreams, and it's telling us as well that we are in for something strange. People don't transform into horrible vermin or cockroaches or insects. That alerts us to a certain fantastical element that we have to now presume is what we are going to be engaged in. Okay? All that from one sentence. That's how you want to be reading. Take note of everything. As I've encouraged you in the past, in your hard copy of the book, write in the margins. Underline, but when you underline or highlight, unlike I did here, but it's because I'm not proficient in these technologies. I like hardcover books or books, hard copies. But you want to know, why did I highlight this, right? When you can come back preparing for an exam or whatever, writing an essay, you want to be highlighting what you perceive to be important. Now you have to be careful because you can fall into the trap of saying, well, everything's important. And it is. So you have to highlight what you think is most important, and then ideally either in the margins or in your notebook or index cards, however you want to do it, you want to write down why you're highlighting it. Okay? What that allows you to do is to be engaged with the text. You could write here, you go, okay, one morning when Gregor Samsa woke from troubled dreams and found himself transformed in his bed into a horrible vermin, you could write, what? What does that mean? How can someone transform into a horrible vermin? That makes no sense. That's not possible. Write it. It's important. Because yes, we are saying, well, that doesn't happen. Right? Again, that keeps you engaged with the text. He lay on his armor-like back, and if he lifted his head a little, he could see his brown belly slightly domed and divided by arches into stiff sections. Okay, now we're getting a fairly detailed description of what this horrible vermin looks like. And we know that he's laying on his back, on this armor-like back. And as we go through the description, he's got all those legs that are, wiggling up here, and he's quite immobile on his back, as we're going to find out. But we have to have that image in our heads. The bedding was hardly able to cover it and seemed ready to slide off any moment. His many legs, pitifully thin compared with the size of the rest of him, waved about helplessly as he looked. So, first paragraph, chock full of information, relevant information, setting the tone for the entire story. And it's a bit weird. Okay, Yeah, I appreciate your comments, but Jane, I'm dealing with 49 students who may not have had me before. This is how I proceed when I teach, okay? I'm not gonna go through every sentence, I don't have time. But for many of the students in the class, this is very helpful. And I think if you pay attention, you'll find it's helpful for you as well, okay? So again, we have close to 40 students in the class. Okay, so the importance here is to ensure that you are reading closely like this, all right, throughout. And again, I can't go through the whole thing with you, but if you skim over things, right, you could miss things that are vitally important in order to understand what's going to transpire later. All right, so please keep that in mind.
Sir, just one question.
Yeah.
You highlighted Wave about helplessly as he looked.
Mhm.
I don't see the significance of that much, because as we later on go on, he seems less troubled by the form.
Okay, that's a good point. All right, but what we have here, what we have in the beginning is, first of all, what's key here is helplessly. All right, and if you remember what happens later on, what happens when he finally gets down and lands on his legs? Okay, that's when the only time when he feels somewhat comfortable. At this stage, he's on his back. The images of him on his back with these legs, multiple legs, they're helplessly waving around. Okay, it speaks to his helplessness in this position of laying on his back. And what's key here is the idea of helplessness. Right? He is helpless. His legs are helpless, but it's speaking about his condition, which is speaking about him. All right? And you may ask, okay, is that significant when we see it at this stage? But if you take note of it now, when he starts using those legs, when they are no longer helpless, it speaks further into this transformation. The reason they're helpless at this point is because he doesn't know how to function in his new transformed state. And it speaks to the fact that he's helpless at this point. We want to see, is he going to remain helpless? Is he going to find a way to maneuver? We're going to see, you know, much of him trying to get off the bed, rocking. He doesn't know how to work this new body of his. Okay? And again, you know, the things you want to pay attention to, I know I'm emphasizing, is a word like helpless, because it's speaking to our main character and what we know about him at this stage. Okay? Everything like armor-like back. That's suggesting what, if it's armor-like?
It's hard, it can't be damaged.
Okay, now, so that's suggesting his back can't be damaged. Are we going to see something coming down later on when he does get damaged? How does he get damaged?
When he falls.
When he falls, and we're going to look at that, and you want to say, where's that damage coming from? He's got the armor-like back. How is he going to use that? Is that significant? Why is the author, why are we being told at this point that his back is armor-like? Armor suggesting that it's protective. We alert ourselves to that because that, we're going to say, okay, that will play into what happens down the road in terms of perhaps protecting him.
Thank you.
Okay? Again, this is, all these things come into play, and you want to take note of them now so that when things transpire further on in the text, you can go, oh, well, that's why we were told it was an armor-like back. And what about those legs? Why are we being told about these many legs that are waving around helplessly? Why is the author drawing our attention to it? And we can take note of it, and then it will be revealed as we continue to read. Okay? All right. So that's what's revealed to us from the start. This is what sets the tone. We have Gregor Samsa on his back, helpless, and we presume at this point, must be really freaking out, you would think. Okay. And he asks, what's happened to me? All right. Again, you want to take note because as well of the dream, because it's mentioned twice here. Is our dreams going to be significant? Because it seems, I mean, is this a nightmare? Why are we being drawn to the idea of a dream? Okay. We get a description of his room, and again, it's a proper human room. The emphasis is on human. Is he human now? Okay. Again, we have this description, and what was revealed here, we see that he has a collection of textiles, samples, like cloth and things like that. And when it's told to us, what does he do for a living? He's a traveling salesman. Is that important?
Yes, it's important.
How so?
It's going to explain to us his daily life, basically, and how he is so troubled. Going back to the troubled dreams, what could be the cause of those dreams? Or maybe his worries.
His worries because of his job?
Yes. Later on, it's more detailed and explained.
Yes, right, because we're being told what he does for a living, and we're wondering if that is related to his current condition because it's being brought up to us at this early stage. And yes, as we know, the job is extraordinarily important. Right? What do we know about his job as a traveling salesman? What does the first part of the story tell us about why is he working as a traveling salesman? Does he like his job?
No, he doesn't. He's actually working to pay off his parents' debt.
Okay. All right. Why is he working to pay off his parents' debt? Are his parents helping him out?
His parents are not helping him out. The father doesn't have a job. It's only him who's working.
Okay. So what does that tell us?
He is under a lot of pressure,
Mm-hmm.
and he's kind of in a prison.
A prison, how so? Elaborate on that.
He's kind of trapped in this moment of time that he has every morning wake up, go catch the early train, go work and sell things all around, and then report back in just to get the debt that his parents may have caused paid off so he can have a normal life again. But he doesn't have that choice right now.
Okay. Yes. But what I would propose then to think about, he gets up every morning and he has to go to work, and he works hard. He's a traveling salesman. He has to travel a lot, and he has to make money. Isn't that what most people do? Whether it's a traveling salesman or another kind of job?
Yes, but he has no passion for this job. It's just like forced on him because they owe something to the boss. So it's just like, you have to do this. He doesn't have any other choice to do any other job. And it feels like a drag to him, I would say.
Well, it certainly feels like a drag to him. We get that sense that he's not crazy about the job. But again, that's not so uncommon. Many people work because they have to work because they have to make money. They have to put food on the table. Well, not all of them have to pay off their parents' debt, but you're very lucky in life if you have a job that you love and that you're passionate about. The reason I'm pointing that out is what he's going through is extraordinary. It does have a relationship directly to his job, but what he does in his job is not necessarily extraordinary. And he makes reference to other salesmen, and traveling salesman is a fairly common job. Still is, well, traveling not so much today, but sales is huge. Millions of people work in sales. Do they complain about it? Is it something that they would rather do something else? Yeah, many of them do. Is that enough to put them into this troubled state, into a and this extreme state of
No.
transformation.
Can it be that he wasn't, he didn't have a good behavior with his colleagues?
It is suggested, we get a sense, certainly as we read it, that he doesn't really communicate much with his colleagues, right? And he seems to have a certain resentment that sometimes they don't seem to be working as hard as he does. But again, relating to when his boss comes to see him, what does the boss accuse him of? What does the boss say about his work and how he's
Kind of
doing?
stealing money, I guess, if you want to sum it down to one word. Like him not putting in sales numbers, like they're really low.
Yeah, I mean,
He's not working hard enough. That's basically what he's suggesting.
that is what he's suggesting. How much credibility do we place on what the boss is saying to him? Remember the context. Think about it in terms of this. He is late for work. And apparently, from what he's been telling us, he's never been late before. You're late for work, you can't come in, you're sick. Does the boss come to your home?
No.
That is unusual. And that whole, and we're going to look at it a little more closely, that whole encounter with the boss puts into question, is the boss trying to provoke him? Is he trying to incite him in some way to get out of that room and get over here to work now? Your job depends on it, you know, and we're not happy with you these days, so you can't take a day off. Is that some kind of perhaps rhetorical manipulation to try to get him to get to work? There's the accusation, you know, even there's rumors out here that you've been stealing money. Do we know if those rumors are true?
No, we don't.
We don't. So we have to remember that we're seeing this, we're still unclear. And that's what we're trying to find out is what's really going on. Why is Gregor Samsa going through this and not the other salesman? Okay, yes, his parents, his father takes these law, you know, his father's the one that is put them all in debt. Gregor has taken on the responsibility of helping his father, his family out. He's working really hard to make sure that they have food on the table, especially breakfast, long, lengthy breakfasts that the father likes to take. And the father doesn't seem to be
Bothered by it at all.
Yeah, it doesn't seem to be wanting to, you know, go out and help. I mean, it's you know, it's almost a reversal of roles here, right? The father, we have no indication that the father is in any way infirmed or unable to work.
Yeah.
But he's allowing his son to go out and be the breadwinner of the family. So what that does is it tells us something about the father. And it's really important in this story to be attentive to the characters. We have clearly at the beginning a metamorphosis, a physical metamorphosis of Gregor Samsa into this horrible vermin.
About the metamorphosis that is physical, I don't see any like psychological change in him at all. Even though he had this massive transformation, he seems very unfazed. It's not like, oh my God, I'm a giant cockroach on my bed.
Well, you know, that's you know, that exactly right. I mean, he goes here, what's happened to me? Okay, we're expecting him now to say, oh my God, freak out, call the police, call the doctor, so, help. But he doesn't.
He's thinking about going to work.
Yeah, it's you know, we see he's observing. We know he's a traveling salesman, and he's sitting there, and we get a little bit here. We'll come back to this, what was brought up earlier about this, where is it, the picture that's hung there, and what is the significance of that? But, you know, he looks out the window, he's noticing that what the weather's like. And of course, when we're reading something like this, everything, tone, setting becomes important. And the fact of the matter that it is raining, right? What does that suggest to us? Rain. and the fog that's going to be referenced soon. All right, when we see rain and fog, what does that say about the tone
mood
and
of
the?
story, the mood is kind of like
It's a gloomy day.
It's a gloomy day, and when it's foggy, what is that? When it's foggy outside, how does that affect our vision?
it's unclear.
Unclear.
Unclear. All right, that's there to alert us that much of what we're looking at here is unclear. It's unclear how he could turn into a vermin. It's unclear as to why he's not freaking out. The lack of clarity, the ambiguity, the fog that surrounds everything that transpires here is important. All right, it's setting that tone and that atmosphere. All right, I want you as well to keep in mind the metamorphosis is most noticeable, obviously, with Gregor Samsa. But pay close attention to the rest of his family. And think to yourselves, do they go through a metamorphosis as well? Now, you can't really answer that till you get to the end of the story. But be thinking about it, because it doesn't say the metamorphosis of Gregor Samsa up here. It's just called metamorphosis. So we're not just looking at Gregor Samsa's transformation. We're looking for all kinds of transformations. Okay? So be attentive to how the parents and the sister in particular are described and what they're like here at the beginning and what they're going to be like when we get to the end. Okay? All right. Let me just is that because I love the feedback, I love the questions, and please keep them coming. But there's a lot of you out there. Is everyone on board here? Are you recognizing what we're talking about? Is there any questions? You can send it through the chat, or now would be a time to unmute yourself and ask. Are you seeing, recognizing what we're talking about? Do you see things that we're not seeing? You think we're wrong in some areas? Engage. Okay? We're good?
Actually, I like the idea that you were like going through and explaining and give us ideas, basically how to analyze those things, because like it has been a long time that I'm not really studying, or reading any sort of literature like this.
No,
So I'm just sorry?
No, I understand that you're not alone. I know that. Okay, that's why I approach it this way, and we're going to continue to do that. All right.
Yeah. So it's very helpful, and I just went through the sections you told us to do, but I didn't really looked into the way you are looking at now. So I'm learning how to do this, and yeah, hopefully I will respond very soon.
Well, no, and you will, and it's really it's something you develop, and the key here in terms of my job is to alert you to these different ways, or this particular way of doing a close reading. You're not English majors at university here, all right? And most of you are taking programs that you don't really engage or encounter literature on a regular basis. This is the 103 class, all right? So you've had the experience of 101 and 102, but these texts are going to be, I would argue, probably more challenging than what you've encountered before. And that's why I want to be meticulous, certainly at the beginning, because it's tools that I'm trying to show you that you can use, especially when we get to Melville. Melville is difficult. I usually say challenging. I'll take it a step further. It's difficult, all right? But what I want to do is lay a framework as we go through the metamorphosis and we study Kafka, so that you will have those tools more readily at your disposal for the rest of the term. Right? And those tools, I promise you, are going to make a huge difference when you take your exit exam. Right? It's going to become, the more we do this, the more natural it'll be to you. You will naturally stop and look at things. All right? You're going to see the word fog. Every time you see the word fog in any story you read, you're going to go, ah, fog makes things unclear. Okay, how does that fit in with the story? How does that fit in with the way people are seeing things? Okay. Let me just see. I think there's a couple in the chat.
Thank you.
Sorry, I'm new, so is this the first or second chapter? Like, I need to cover up anything else before this, or just this one?
Okay, so this is the first thing we're reading. All right, and again, there's 3 parts to the Metamorphosis.
Uh-huh.
We're reading the first part today.
Okay.
For next week, you want to read part 2.
Okay.
And then the third week, part 3, that's when we'll wrap it up. And again, if we need more time with it, we'll take more time. We have some flexibility to ensure I don't want to move on if people are still having issues.
Mhm.
Right? Before we move on to Melville, I want everyone to be sure that they are engaging in this kind of reading. Okay?
And every week is like 2.5%?
Yeah, for what we're going to do, okay, it's a good question, and a little bit of the logistics involved here. The plan is to give you a quiz pretty much every class. And the plan is to record all our classes and then post them. Couple of problems there, right? We've been having, and maybe you've noticed this in your other classes, we've been having server problems. So I had a class on Monday as I was about to give the quiz, and I'm hoping this doesn't happen today. The server went down and I couldn't post the quiz properly on Omnibox. In terms of the recordings of the classes, it's working about 50% of the time. All right, it speaks to the importance of attending the classes. I'm recording this. If everything goes according to plan, as it should, after we're done, it's going to convert, and then I will post it later tonight or tomorrow. But 50% of my classes have not converted properly. I've been in touch with the IT department over at TAB, and they recognize, they've acknowledged the problem, and they're working on it. But
And okay,
it's
what
an
will
issue.
be the deadline for that?
So what I
That's
do with the quizzes, the way that I've designed it now, the quizzes are going to be given in class time. And the quiz will have a time limit, so I can set that in Omnibox. So say we start the quiz at 11:30, I give you till 12. At 12, you can no longer submit it.
How many questions will be in that
Depends.
quiz?
It depends. Sometimes the quiz will be multiple choice, 10, 20 questions. Sometimes it may be one question that requires 1 or 2 paragraph answer. It'll change week to week. Sometimes we may, even depending on how things go, I may be giving you quizzes specifically on grammar issues and writing exercises. However many quizzes we have, if we have technical issues and sometimes it doesn't work here, the totality of all the quizzes will constitute 30% of your final mark. So if it works out, we have one every day, then they'll be worth 2.5 thereabouts. Okay, but the totality of these in-class quizzes will be 30% of your final mark.
Okay.
Right? Then you have 30% for your midterm and then 40% for your final. And a reminder that your midterm and your final will be taken in the classroom at TAB.
Okay.
All right. And we'll talk about that more when we get closer to it, because they're still working on the logistics of that to make sure that we have proper social distancing and so on. All right.
And for today, quiz, you're gonna post it?
Today, we're going to have a quiz after the break,
Okay.
and it'll be timed. And I'll explain it in detail once we get to it. Okay?
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have 2 more things to say. First of all, I want to know, if we do a quiz and we don't do really well on it, will we get a chance to have a redo?
Yeah, okay. Those of you who've had me before know that I always do that. And, you know, yes, I will arrange something so that I will add a bonus, at least one bonus quiz that will allow you to get rid of the lowest grade you got on any of the quizzes we've done and replace it with the bonus. And I may even do two. You know, bear with me. I mean, this is, again, strange times. And teaching this long distance method is challenging on both ends of the screen. I'm not here to try to put more stress on you or to make things more difficult than they need to be. So yes, I will give opportunities to better that 30% grade score based on the in-class tests or quizzes, but within reason. You know, a big part of the way these quizzes are designed, unlike many of the other quizzes, is it's to ensure that you are doing the reading and that you're able to understand what's happening in the readings. Okay, so it's more designed, more than the grade. What I'm more interested in is a demonstration that you are following along, that you're able to engage the text and interpret things properly. That's what the tests are to help me. It's all in preparation to do your midterm and your final, which will be questions based on the texts. And you have to understand and see and recognize what's happening in the text in order to write a good essay. Okay?
Okay. And the second thing I want to say, I still don't understand why Gorjagor is so sick of his job. Like, devil take it. He says that in the book. Like, I don't understand still. Why is he so
upset with his job?
Yes, I still don't understand.
Well, it's a good question. Anyone want to respond? Why does he go on to, and is his complaints about his job, what is that, saying? Is there a reason why he hates his job so much? How much does he actually hate his job? Does he hate his job disproportionately to what a vast or many people who don't like their jobs just do it because they have to make money?
I feel like he hates it in a whole nother level than normal people.
Well, I mean, one of the things, and this was pointed out in the chat right now, yes, part of it is, and there may be a resentment regarding the fact that he feels he has to do this because of the responsibility that is placed on him because of the parents' debt. Right? So, it may not be just the job itself and what's involved, because it's a lot of traveling and sales is always a tough job. It may be partly due to some extent. Okay, in terms of the chat, let's all be sure that we, remain civil, and let's base the questions in the chat about questions in the text and direct them more to me than anything else. Can we agree on that? Okay, so all chat things, let's have those directed to me and I'll respond to them. All right, I want that to be clear. I don't want to have to turn off the chat option. Okay. So yes, part of it is due to his feeling of responsibility to have to be taking care of his parents, but where does he express that that's the reason why he hates his job? Does he say outright, I hate this job because I shouldn't have to be doing this because, why doesn't my father go out there and work? Does he ever say something like that?
No, not directly.
No. So if that is a big reason as to why he hates his job, he certainly isn't talking about it in that way. He talks about the job in general. But of course, what surrounds him is this tremendous sense of responsibility that he seems to accept, doesn't seem to complain so much specifically about that responsibility, that he is the one who has to take care of the family. But clearly that's there. And it's one of those more subtle elements that we are looking at that relates to why is he going through what he's going through, transforming
Isn't
into
it a lack of sympathy he's getting from the family?
the lack of sympathy from his family. Well, that great question, and this is something that you want to be attentive to. And that's what I mentioned earlier. You want to pay as much attention to the family, the character of the family, and their evolution through the story, as you do to Gregor. You know, it's what I meant when I said, you know, what the story is called The Metamorphosis, and we have the obvious metamorphosis of Gregor Samsa. But what about the family members in terms of how they change? What are they like at the beginning? And let's talk about that. When they deal with this situation, initially they have no idea that he's turned into a giant beetle, bug, insect, vermin.
So my opinions of the family: sister, very concerned from the beginning and towards the end. Father, indifferent, couldn't care less. And the mother is kind of like in between. It's like it's not showing a lot of concern, but it's not like showing none like the father. And
Okay.
towards the end, when they see him just running out the door, they're kind of just shocked.
Well, okay, so let's hold on to that a little bit. What'd you say about the sister?
The sister seemed very worried. She even started crying over beside the door.
Who else cries?
There was another girl in there too, I think.
Anyone? Who else cries?
Mother?
Well, the mother cries. What else? She kind of freaks out, to say the least. What does the father do?
Nothing.
He just like yells at him and thinks that he's making an excuse of not going to work. Like he's not taking the situation seriously.
And how does the father react when he sees him?
He leaves.
Pushes him back in the room, I think.
Eventually, all right, let's jump around a little bit here. And again, I know those of you who, and one, you know, very specifically saying, you know, the close reading is something you want to do. We will. We're going to jump around a bit because we're getting some really good questions here. But I will come back to looking at things when, you know, fog and all that stuff. So bear with me. And I think when we come back and do that closer reading again, yeah, he tries to kill him. Well, I'm not sure he's trying to kill him at this stage. He certainly at the end he's driving him back into his room, right? But let's see if I can find it. Hold on, let me put this down. Because again, everything you want to be looking at within the context. So we have, remember, the chief clerk arrives. Well, I don't want to jump the gun here. Let me see if I can find this. Because there's a very particular reaction when we're talking about Gregor's father, and it's important to pay attention again to all the family members, right? But what do we know about Gregor's father? We talked briefly about it. Remember, his breakfast, the most important meal of the day, stretches out over several hours. That's quite a breakfast. And that tells us a lot about the father, right? But particularly with the father, wow.
Isn't the part where the father says, well, I don't need a locksmith after all?
Yeah, I mean, well, you know, something to keep in mind with this, and it's not necessarily clear when you're first reading it because it's so bizarre, but some of it is actually quite funny in terms of how it's described. It's almost like slapstick humor. When you think about how does Gregor open the door?
Can you repeat that again?
How does Gregor, remember Gregor stipulates,
His mouth, kind of? It
yeah,
was like, no, turning it.
because what do we know about his mouth? What does he discover when he's exploring his new body, about his mouth? He has no teeth, right? But he has whatever that mouth is, it's very, very strong. So how does he open that door? Anyone?
He puts his mouth over the key as he's standing leaning on the door and just tries to turn it with his mouth. And
Well,
yeah,
let's look at it. Okay,
His jaws helped him to do that. His strong jaw.
is strong. Now, keep in mind. Remember, it was brought up before. You know, Gregor's reaction to this is, I'll be in the office soon, right? So you talk about strange on top of strange, right? It's strange he's woken up into this giant insect. His reaction to it is extraordinarily strange, as was pointed out by one of you earlier. I mean, why isn't he freaking out? You know, he's like, okay, let me just collect myself and I can catch the 8 o'clock train. Okay, I'll be late, but it'll be okay. I'm gonna have to scramble to get that train, but I can do that. Immediately, we should be all going, really? How are you gonna do that? Even when the boss comes and is trying to coax him out, when he actually decides, okay, I'll go talk to them. I mean, his lack of awareness of how damaged he is, for want of a better word, right? Yeah, we're getting to that. That's where I'm trying to get to. What does the father do when we find? Does anyone remember how the initial reaction of the father? All right, we'll jump over here and we'll see that because it's important. These are the details that you want to be attentive to when you're reading. Okay, type of details that will really help you in terms of your understanding of the story.
The father covered his eyes and he wept. Is it?
Thank you. Good job. Okay. Now I asked you that a couple of times. No one seemed to have recognized and realized that, and it's obviously very important because when we're being introduced to all these characters at the beginning, we're trying to get a sense of who they are. Now, we know that the father, when we ask what the father do, he pushes him back into the room, he's angry and all this stuff. But his initial reaction when he sees his son transformed into this insect, he cries. Okay, that's important. You want to be attentive to that. So whoever that was, again, not being in the classroom, very frustrating. Thank you. That's what I was trying to get at. And I want you all, everyone, to be able to recognize those things. And that's, again, comes back to this idea of close reading. Since I jumped here, let's take a look at the opening of the door. All right. And remember what I said about the almost comic imagery here. He set himself to the task of turning the key in the lock with his mouth. He seemed, unfortunately, to have no proper teeth. How was he then to grasp the key? But the lack of teeth was, of course, made up for with a strong jaw. Again, this is emphasizing this non-human quality. Using the jaw, he really was able to start the key turning, ignoring the fact that he must have been causing some kind of damage, right? He's damaging himself. How does he know that? Because brown fluid came from his mouth and flowed over the key and dripped onto the floor. It's quite an image. Right? And it's important that you get this image in your head. You know, he's got all these flappy little arms. He's got this armor-like shell of a back. He's managed to get over to the door where the key is. He can't use those flimsy little hands to do anything to unlock the door. So he uses his mouth, which is then, we're reminded that it's not a human mouth, and he's damaging it. And we got this brown fluid oozing from his mouth. It's quite a horrific image. And of course, no one has seen him at this point, so the chief clerk says, oh, he's turning the key, he's going to come out. Note Gregor's response. Gregor was greatly encouraged by this, by the chief clerk saying, oh, look, he's turning the key. But they all should have been calling to him, his father, his mother too, saying, well done, Gregor. They should have cried, keep at it, keep hold of the lock. What does that reveal to us? What is that telling us?
He doesn't get appreciation from the family, from
Yeah.
the parents.
I mean, there's clearly a disappointment there. And look, the encouragement, or what Gregor perceives as encouragement, is coming from the chief clerk, not his family. And his immediate reaction is, why aren't they all encouraging me? Why aren't they all saying, good job, Gregor? Wait. And of course, it's why should they? He's opening the door. They have no idea what's happened to him. Right? They have no way of knowing what a struggle it is for him to open that door. So his expectations that they should all be encouraging him are not predicated on his understanding that they know what he's going through. So it seems to be reflecting on something broader than that. That perhaps in other aspects of his life, he has wanted to hear encouragement from his father and his mother. Now, what that can suggest, especially when we put into the context of what we know from just even the first section that we've read, is that Gregor feels that, maybe once in a while his father and mother should have said, we really appreciate everything you're doing for us. Father could say, I really appreciate the fact that you let me have my 4-hour breakfast. I don't have to go to work while you do. Okay. These little things slip in because often, more often than not, Gregor seems to, have accepted, okay, this is what I have to do. He doesn't seem to be, at least at this stage, directly blaming his father. How could have you put us in debt, and why did you make me have to do this horrible job? It's suggested, and it's subtle, and it's in little things like this that it's revealed. And that helps us get a better understanding of how distraught Gregor is and why he's so distraught. And it tells us much about the father and mother here, that they have not been appreciating what he's done, what he does for them. And we can appreciate it because when we put it all together, we're going, especially, why the emphasis on the father's 4-hour breakfast? Is that normal?
No.
You know anyone who has a 4-hour breakfast? Well, maybe on occasion, a big 4-hour brunch if it's a special occasion. But what we're told is the father has a 4 hours long breakfast pretty much every day, and he reads the newspaper and everything else. And while Gregor's getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning and having to get to work, and he's traveling and everything else. So it's in this more subtle way. That it's revealing about what Gregor thinks about his father. Yeah, the whoever it was that found where the father cries.
It's me, Fatima.
Fatima, where was that? What page in our book? Do you have the book that I ordered?
No.
Okay.
It's page 86 from the school's book.
Okay, page 86. So if you have your book, since I'm kind of, I don't want to waste time trying to find it here. We can look at it here and we'll probably be able to find it on this text as well. 86 where? Top, bottom of page? His father clenched with his fist with a pugnacious expression as if ready to punch Gregor back and then looked uncertainly at him. Yeah, okay, so it's an important one. I wish I could, hold on. Let's try and get it here so we can look at it together. Still, again, challenges of doing. We were looking here. This is, I'm going to read it straight from the book, and we'll try to find it here as well. But what it says, and it's really telling in terms of our understanding of the Father, at least what we're understanding at these early stages of the revelation of the Father's character. Okay, so when he sees him, what do we have here? He first looked at his father with folded hands and took, okay, she collapsed. Let's get it. His father, and if those of you who have the book, this is on 86, second to last paragraph, halfway through the paragraph. His father clenched his fist with a pugnacious expression. What's pugnacious? With a pugnacious expression, as if ready to push Gregor back into his room.
Like he's determined to.
Yeah, it's combative to a large extent.
Yeah.
Okay.
Kind of,
Yes.
I was gonna say kind of like a bellicose like form of expression. I don't know, like he's eager to get him back in.
Eager to get him back in, and the pugnacious is a word that is suggesting almost a combative, in a fighting way. And that's his expression. But note, the pugnacious expression, as if ready to push Gregor back into his room, then looked uncertainly around the living room, covered his eyes with his hands, and cried, his mighty chest shaking with sobs. Now, we're going to see a lot of Gregor's father, and we're not going to see him often behaving like that, if at all, other than that scene. And it tends to get lost when we see him, as we look over here, towards Gregor's father sees the chief clerk's stick in his right hand, right? This is after the chief clerk ran away. Picked up a large newspaper from the table with the left hand and used them to drive Gregor back into his room, stamping his foot at him as he went. Okay, so what do we make of this? That, he's got a stick. He looks like he's threatening Gregor, but he was crying. Now, it could be the more obvious is, my God, he just saw his son and sees him in this state, and that breaks him to some extent. But he seems to recover very quickly and then gets almost violent. Well, to some extent, to a large extent, does get violent. Why the emphasis on this? And we're going to have to look at Greta and the mother as well, because we want to see how the three family members go through their own metamorphosis, as well as Gregor's metamorphosis. And most people, when they think of Kafka's metamorphosis, they think of Gregor Samsa turning into a giant insect. And that's the metamorphosis. What I'm suggesting is there's a lot of transformations going on here. Okay. All right, let me just get this out of here. Let's, because it's almost break time, I want to come back up here And since we're close to break time, questions? Is everyone, following within reason? We have been jumping around a lot. I usually don't proceed that way. I'm pretty meticulous going through chronologically, but the questions have been really good. So I'm gonna, we will have to be doing a bit of jumping around because I want to address those questions. But I will be coming back and looking at certain sections in detail. Now remember, I can't go through the whole thing in detail with you. But when I go through a section, the way I went through that first paragraph, okay, it's to, again, alert you as to how you should be going through every paragraph when you're reading. Right? And it's something that comes with experience, especially in these texts that we're dealing with this semester, because they are dense and layered. Okay? Let's just get back up here a bit. Does everyone recognize the strangeness of Gregor's reaction? Oh, a lot of time here. Okay. Yes, okay. All right, so where are some of the examples of this strangeness? We're looking at the same page. Do you see it here? How do we?
When she, when he think that she's dreaming, like it's not the truth. So
Yeah.
that shows her strangeness.
Yeah, I mean, we have that, the dreams, but notice he immediately dismisses the fact that it was a dream. He's saying it wasn't a dream. And he's acknowledging that he has been transformed. But he doesn't seem to be able to accept it. It's perhaps it's just too, understandably, too over the top for his mind to comprehend, because he's talking here, right? The next train left at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad, and the collection of samples was still not packed. What are the samples? Anyone, what are the samples?
What?
Hmm?
Oh, it's like maybe Carmen's product or.
It's the samples that he sells, right?
Oh yeah, sure.
Right. So when he has to rush like mad, and his sample, he hasn't packed. That's why he gets up so early. That's why he gets up at 4 in the morning, because he has to put all his stuff together, pack up his samples, because he has to go as a traveling salesman with the samples to wherever he's going to sell his product. But note, right? So the next train, when he's thinking about how I'm going to get to work. His biggest concern here, right? He'd set the clock for 4 o'clock. And he's like, how did I not wake up? I always wake up with the alarm. Okay, it was possible that he slept through it, even though notice how it's furniture rattling noise of the alarm clock. True, he had not slept peacefully, reminding us of the troubled dreams. What should he do now? So he's sitting there on his back, transformed into this vermin. He's asking, what should I do now? And his thinking is the next train was at 7. If he were to catch that, he would have to rush like mad, and the collection of samples was still not packed. Oh, and by the way, he did not feel particularly fresh and lively. I point this out, to again show his disconnect with reality here. Of course, he doesn't feel fresh and lively, but there are these elements of humor. All right, and once we recognize them, the juxtaposition of the kind of humor that we're encountering with the gravity of the situation and the story really develops into, at times, very disturbing environment that we're dealing with. And when we come back after the break, we're going to look at more of this kind of humor that's there, and how that affects us as readers. Should we be laughing? Should we see it as humorous? Doesn't seem to be a humorous situation. It seems pretty grave. Am I misreading it if I find there to be humor here? Is there something wrong with me? Going to be some of the things we're going to look at when we come back. All right, it's 10 o'clock. Before we break, questions? Keep in mind that the reason that I emphasize this detailed reading is because in the quizzes, midterm, and final, and I would argue when you do your exit exam, the awareness of the details are going to help you formulate a thesis and an argument. If you miss the details, your argument could easily lapse and be faulty. Okay? And that you want to be very wary of. So everything matters here. Questions, concerns before we break? We're good? Okay, so let's say 10:30. All right, it's 10 o'clock now. We come back at 10:30, and then we'll pick up from here, and then we will be going to the quiz. All right? Come back during the half hour. If you have some questions, write them down and hit me with them. All right? That's what I'm here for. Good? All right? All right, we'll see you all at 10:30. Okay. So let's go back in, and I just want to look at a couple of moments that I think are really important. I'll start off by asking you, what do we make of Gregor's voice when he tries to talk?
Animal-like voice.
Yeah. Animal-like voice, or certainly, do people understand him?
I don't think so. It's not very clear, but it seems that they didn't.
Right, and this is a key point. I mean, when we speak, what are we doing?
Expressing ourselves.
Yeah, we're expressing ourselves, we're communicating. You take away our voice, you take away our ability to communicate. And that becomes very much a prominent theme here, right? We find that Gregor is unable to communicate. I mean, there's a number of times here where he really tries to explain himself. Of course, it's a bizarre explanation because he's trying to explain, don't worry, I'll be coming to work and all this stuff. But at the same time, he's lost his ability to communicate with other human beings. And it speaks in a broader sense to the question of whether he was communicating before his transformation. When we learn in this first part that nature of his job and the nature of his situation has rendered him very isolated. We're told when his mother's trying to explain to the boss who comes that, you know, he doesn't have friends, he doesn't go out. He's extraordinarily isolated. This is before they see him in his transformed state. Because again, we're trying to always be looking in terms of Gregor, what is the nature of this transformation? Yes, we have this very in-our-face description of what he has changed into physically. But of course, what's surrounding this is, you know, what is the metaphorical transformation he's gone through and what precipitated it? You know, why is Gregor the one going through this? Yes.
At the beginning, apparently everybody understand like simple words he's trying to say because they bypass it immediately. Like they understood him like he said simple words. But when he tried to make like a paragraph talking about like, oh, I'm gonna do this, do that, nobody understood it. So to a level, I think they understand.
Well, at the beginning they seem to, and it's a good observation. But the more we proceed, the more his voice is really a reflection of that physical transformation in the sense that it's no longer human. And therefore, it limits his ability to communicate to other humans. And it speaks to his lack of humanity, in a sense. Right? And it's that juxtaposition between this extraordinary state that he's in, and yet his mind is still reacting to it in a rational or practical way, in a human way. But it's applying human practicality to something that is extraordinary, something that really defies any kind of human explanation. How do you reconcile with everything we know as human beings the idea of a human being transforming into an insect? It's something that really is so far beyond the pale of understanding that how do we talk about it? And that's emphasized in Gregor's inability to communicate. All right, if we take a look, all right, Gregor was shocked when he heard his own voice answering. It could hardly be recognized as the voice he had before. It was uncontrollable squeaking mixed in with it. The words could be made out at first, but then there was a sort of echo, which made them unclear, leaving the hearer unsure whether he had heard properly or not. All right, and this becomes a key element insofar as, and you'll see this as you get into part 2 and part 3, how the family interacts and how they treat him. If he's unable to express himself, how are they to know what he wants, what he needs? And the frustration that comes with that as Gregor continually, to a large extent, disintegrates, right? And his inability to seek help because he can't properly ask for help. And even if he could, what kind of help could be provided? So be attentive to that communication idea as you continue reading, and to see if there's any reconciliation there. In particular, when we start seeing in part 2 how the family is going to respond now that they have to accept this situation. What are they going to do about it? And how the situation, again, impacts them and transforms them. All right. What do we make of the sister? We looked a bit at the father. We saw how he reacted when he first sees Gregor. And we know at the end of this section that the father basically, and it's quite a scene, we really should look at in more detail. If you remember, the father has the stick from the head clerk at the office and a rolled up newspaper. So try to imagine, what does that remind us of as he's trying to get Gregor back into his room? It's almost like a lion tamer, an animal trainer. He's holding a stick and a rolled up newspaper, and he's guiding him. Get back into your cage, get back into your room. All right. And the mother, what do we get? What sense do we get of the mother before we talk about Greta?
I feel like the mother, immediately after seeing him stare, she jumps on the table and then runs to the father.
Yeah, she seems genuinely terrified. Understandably so. How is she before she sees him? How does she react when all they're concerned about is, Gregor, why?
Him getting to work.
Sorry?
Him getting to work.
Him getting to work. Like, everyone's concern is they wake up and Gregor's still there. Why aren't you at work, Gregor? Right? And we have to be asking ourselves, and keep this in mind as you continue reading, as we see their characters develop. Is there concern, oh my God, are you sick? Is something wrong with you? Or is their concern is, hey, you have to get to work. You can't lose your job. We need your money.
They're not concerned if he's sick. They're just concerned if he's working or not to make the money.
All of them?
No,
No.
the mother was concerned about his health, and he thought that they need a doctor.
Right. The mother does express the concern for his health and wants a doctor.
And the sister ran out, I think, probably for that.
Right. That's a good observation. And the sister is sent to get a doctor. There must be something wrong with him for him to have missed his train and to be not going to work. It's not normal. And she, she very much, before she sees him, defends him. All right. It's important to remember, as again we see her evolve through the story. She's telling the chief clerk, he works so hard, and he's a good boy. He doesn't have friends though, and he's always isolated. And it genuine sense that the mother is a caring, and concerned mother, and her reaction once she sees Gregor is understandable. All of them, because even the father at first, is crying and so on. What about the sister?
Sister is very worried. She cries next to the door as well after he doesn't open it or respond to much.
So what is that? What's our sense? If we look at the way the three of them react to Gregor.
I sense that from a level of caring sister first, the mother, then rest.
Yeah, we certainly get a sense that the sister is perhaps closest to Gregor and seems to care about Gregor the most. And you want to watch that carefully in part 2. And when we start seeing who's going to take care of Gregor, because obviously Gregor needs to be taken care of now. Of course, there's the irony there. Gregor's been taking care of everyone. Now Gregor needs to be taken care of. The roles are reversed to a large extent. Okay? So, oops, sorry. So when we look at the sister, let's see how she reacts at first. Okay? Right? We look here at the other side of at the other side door. His sister came plaintively, Gregor, aren't you well? Do you need anything? Okay, so there seems to be very much a genuine concern, and that's important because much of how we obtain our understanding of the characters of the mother, the father, and the sister is in relation to how they respond to Gregor. okay? But we get this genuine sense of caring and concern. What else do we know about the system? How does she respond when everyone sees her? Okay. I want you to be thinking about this, okay? Particularly be attentive to the sister. And we'll come back to it. What do we make of the office manager? Why is he there? What role is he playing? How does he treat Gregor?
He doesn't treat Gregor well. It's just like, go get to work. You need to make money.
Right. You know, and even emphasize, he says, listen, you know, you're in this job, you may not be feeling well, but that's no excuse for not going to work.
And I feel like he's downgrading Gregor. Like, he's kind of...
Well, he very much, you know, lays some certain accusations. He says he's accusing him, you know, especially you need to get to work because your work is subpar. There's rumors that you have been stealing money. It's quite aggressive. And he's doing this in front of Gregor's family. It's almost as if he's trying to humiliate Gregor into coming back to work, right? Now, if we try to put ourselves into the office manager's mind, I mean, he's come all the way here. It suggests a couple of things. Is Gregor that important that the office manager has to come down if he's late? I mean, it's unusual. The fact that he is attempting to humiliate Gregor, it speaks to what kind of relationship Gregor may have with his boss at work. And we were talking earlier about, you know, why does Gregor do this job if he doesn't like the job? And there's, you know, is it because he has to do it because of taking care of his family? Well, yes, that's part of it, but you know, we see right here, Gregor was still there when they asked, you know, why are they worried? There was no need to worry about things like that yet. Gregor was still there and had not the slightest intention of abandoning his family. And there is no indication that, you know, and it's surprising perhaps, that he doesn't demonstrate any kind, it comes out in other ways, but any overt anger at the fact that he is the sole provider for this family. I mean, he seems to have accepted that. And while he may not love his job, he does believe in his responsibilities to do the right thing at quite a cost. And if you don't like your job, at a cost because of the nature of the job, you don't develop any friendships and you're isolated. All right, it's a commentary on, to a large extent, the larger issue of people working in jobs they don't like, having to work extraordinary hours, not being happy with their work, and what that does to people, individuals, in terms of their humanity. It's not overly, it doesn't have a job that is beyond the pale. It's a tough job, but the commentary is it's still pretty much an ordinary job. and it's a job where you make money and you don't have to love it. You have to put food on the table. What does that do? Just something as simple as that we all, to a large extent, take for granted. How does that affect one's human qualities? Well, that's part of the commentary that's going on here. Okay. What else do we know about the exchange with the office manager? Well, let's recall, he goes through this ghastly scene where he opens up the door with his mouth. And this brown ooze is dripping all over the place. And then he gets the door open, and this is after he's been berated by the office manager. How does the office manager react when he sees him?
He's scared of him. He's like starting to walk away.
Right, and again, the description is quite pronounced, right? So he was still occupied with the difficult, unable to pay attention, and then when he heard the chief clerk exclaim aloud, "Oh!" which sounded like a soughing in the wind. Now he also saw him. He was nearest to the door, his hand pressed against his open mouth. Again, pay attention to the imagery here and the images. And slowly retreating as if driven by a steady and invisible force. Gregor's mother, her hair still disheveled from the bed despite the chief clerk's being there, right? That's because, normally the mother would be looking better. She just got out of bed. I looked at his father, then she unfolded her arms, took 2 steps forward towards Gregor, and sank down to the floor into her skirts that spread themselves out over her as her head disappeared down onto her breast. What's that? What just happened to her?
She fainted.
She fainted. Okay. So again, the details in seeing exactly what transpires here, right? His father looked hostile and clenched his fist, wanted to knock Gregor back into his room. Then he looked uncertainly around the room, covered, we saw this, and wept so that his powerful chest shook. So this is the initial reactions when they see him. Only half his body could be seen. They haven't even seen the whole thing. We've had this, we talked about this before, right? The breakfast. Note where we're learning about this and how this is presented. This relates to the structure of the story. Stretch out for several hours, but very telling concerning Gregor's father and how he is perhaps taking Gregor very much for granted. Okay, he's making these observations, right? He just opened the door and so on. Photograph of Gregor when he was a soldier. Remember that? What's that doing there? He notices the picture of him when he was a lieutenant in the army, sword in hand, a carefree smile on his face. What's that tell us? Well, state the obvious. What is it? What's the obvious thing it tells us?
It's the the physical strength and structure he had, and now the change.
Yes, very good. I mean, first and foremost, it tells us he used to be in the Army.
Yeah.
And he used to have a carefree smile on his face. Right? So it's a reflection of what he was like in the past. And it's placed here at this stage as a contrast, not just to his transformation into the insect, beetle, bug, but also in contrast to what his life has been like recently.
So that's also a reason why he feels that he is in a prison, like about his job.
Yes, okay, a prison not just about his job, but seemingly about his whole life. Right, remember when the mother is saying, you know, to defend him, how he has no friends. Okay, if you're a lieutenant in the Army, you're surrounded by people.
Yeah.
You have a carefree smile on your face. So the transformation of Gregor, you know, is layered. We get this, you know, very brief mention of this picture of him as a lieutenant in the Army with a carefree smile, and it's very easy just to pass over that without recognizing its significance. I think it's very significant. It's basically informing us that there's been multiple transformations in Gregor. Okay. And that it explains if he is reflecting on what things used to be like, not taking into account his transformation into the insect and what his life is like now that he has all these responsibilities. And of course, you have a lot of responsibilities if you're a lieutenant in the Army, but they're different kinds of responsibilities. His responsibilities now are very much tied to his family. But again, he says, as we saw just before, you know, he has no intention of abandoning his family. You have to do what you have to do. So important to remember that we are introduced to what his past was like here. We'll see more of what Gregor's past was like as we continue reading, which will again emphasize the layered transformations, metamorphosites, so to speak. Okay. Just as well, something to be to really be attentive to are doors, right? As you continue reading, pay attention to doors. Start thinking about what is the significance of doors? What do doors do? Well, we have the big scene with the door. Remember, he locks his door. It's become a habit since he's traveling all the time. No one can get into his room at the beginning, right? That leads to that whole scene with the mouth unlocking the door. He locks his door. It's a bit unusual. You lock your door in your own home. The only people, the people you're living with, your family. It introduces this theme, this idea of doors. And when we're seeing something being referenced, again, door, every time you see the word door, if it's being repeated, then it should alert us that there's some importance to the idea of doors. And then first thing we have to ask ourselves, well, what do doors do?
Well, could it be like that he's kind of trapped in his own life?
Very good, yes. Because what does a door do? A door can be open or closed. You open up a door, it leads to lots of possibilities. If the door is closed and the door is locked, you're isolated.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
What could be the symbolism of him not hearing the alarm go off?
Good question. Well, do you have thoughts? It's a good question insofar as he makes a point of saying that never, ever happens.
Exactly. And like you get like the sense that he's a very punctual person.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, especially after being in the Army. I mean, like that's something that's super severe over there.
Nice connection. I like that. Very good.
Like what would be the reasoning behind him not hearing it? Could it be that that he's stuck in a time before the alarm actually goes off?
Interesting. I'm not sure. That's an interesting observation. I don't know if that would really work. I mean, certainly on some level, it's just a further emphasis on this dramatic change he's into now. He's always been woken up by the alarm, right?
Perfect.
So, and this is something that we see right at the beginning, and the emphasis that, you know, the alarm is so loud it rattles the furniture. How could have I slept through the alarm? Well, you know, guess what, buddy? You're a bug now, right? So
Okay.
it fits with that. But the other thing with the alarm, and something else to be attentive to, is an alarm clock. A clock represents time. And I think if especially when you get to the part 2 and part 3, the concept of time, how much time is going to be transpiring. Notice the emphasis at the beginning, where he keeps looking at, oh, now it's 7:15. Oh, now it's 7:20. It's drawing our attention to this concept of time. Now, I'm glad you asked that question, because that ties in directly to the alarm clock. All right, and we're told often about how much time Gregor has to spend traveling. I mean, getting up at 4 a.m. as well. That's you know, that can be intense. All right, so this idea of time, especially when we start looking at how time unfolds in part 2 and part 3, and what Gregor's concept of time is. Does his concept of time change? And how, if we look at the family, right, who are, you know, hours-long breakfast for the father and things like that, that kind of breaks up the kind of time that Gregor certainly is on, where it's very rigid. 4 o'clock alarm clock, 7 o'clock train, be to work at such and such a time. And it does tie back into in the Army, where everything is so exact and punctual. Okay. So a lot, just on the image of that alarm clock, look how much we can extrapolate from that. As possibilities, remember, at this stage, most of you, if not all of you, have only read part 1. And all these things that we're exploring here are foundation for everything that comes next. So ideas of time, the idea of, you know, what the relationship is with the family, his relationship with work, his relationship with his new body, and establishes something that from which everything grows. So the need to have a real good grounding of the beginning of anything we study is necessary to really have a full appreciation of what transpires afterwards. Okay? So when we look at this here, right, he could see into the landing and the stairs, and they were okay. Now then, note what he does here. Now then, said Gregor, well aware that he was the only one to have kept calm. Everyone else is freaking out. He thinks he's calm. And he's talking now. I'll get dressed straight away now, pack up my samples, and set off. Will you please just let me leave? You can see, he said to the chief clerk, that I'm not stubborn. I like to do my job. Being a commercial traveler is arduous, yes, but without traveling, I couldn't earn my living. So where are you going? Into the office? Yes. Will you report everything accurately? He's asking, he's report everything accurately? All right, so what are we getting here? We're getting a sense that Gregor at this stage is, while seemingly calm, he thinks he's the only one who's kept calm. This is very much absurd. Well, why would you report everything accurately? Why would you go and report accurately what you're seeing here? That's not to Gregor's benefit. Okay? So what we're getting here, and of course we've been dealing with throughout, is this sense of absurdity. All right? The situation is absurd. The situation begins with the absurdity of him being transformed into a bug. The absurdity is then there's a pile-on of absurdities here. His response, not seemingly, okay, well, what do I do? How am I going to get to work and things like this, adds to the absurdity. This whole speech here, after he's seen how people have reacted, you know, he's being completely practical and rational here, seemingly, which of course is absurd in the context. Take this out in another context, it makes complete sense. It's you know, of course, you're well aware that I'm seriously in debt to our employer, as well as having to look after my parents and my sister, so that I'm trapped in a difficult situation. He acknowledges it, but I will work my way out of it again. This is very practical, right? At this stage, his thoughts, ideas, his rationale is still very human. Please don't make things any harder for me than they already are, and don't take sides against me at the office. I know that nobody likes the travelers. They think we earn an enormous wage as well as having a soft time of it. That's just prejudice, but they have no particular reason to think better. But you, sir, you have a better overview than the rest of the staff. In fact, if I can say this in confidence, a better overview than the boss himself. What's he doing here? In this very human and rational manner, what's he doing by saying this? Of course, he's not being understood, and the chief clerk is freaking out, but he is talking to him rationally. And what's he doing when he says, but you, sir, you have a better overview than the rest of the staff? In fact, if I can say this in confidence, a better overview than the boss himself. What's he doing? Something very human here. Anyone? Why is he saying this? Does he like the chief clerk?
No, he doesn't.
So why is he? So then why is he saying this to him?
Well, as you can see in the chat, someone said to get on his good side, and I agree with them.
Oh, I didn't see that. Oh yeah, there. Yes, to get on his good side. Yes. Sorry, I didn't see the chat. Yes, he's flattering him. Flattering him. He's employing a sales tactic. If any of you have ever done any kind of sales work, you'll know what that is, right? So it's an expression of what he does in his job. And now he's trying to fix the situation. And he's explaining himself. Yes, I know it's hard work and so on. But then he does this little, very human thing. You know, I know, you know, by the way, you're better than even the boss. So he doesn't believe that for a minute. But he is now playing. He is engaged in this human activity of flattery in an attempt to resolve the situation he's in a practical manner. And that would work if all it was that he overslept. Or could work. It might work. It would be a logical strategy if this was simply him oversleeping. But of course, in the context of what we know at this point, it's fantastically absurd. Okay. And he goes right through it. Now, of course, the reaction to this, and part of the absurdity, this is what I'm trying to build to in as we go through this. When absurdity reaches a certain level, the comic elements become pronounced. Okay, so the chief clerk turned away as soon as Gregor had started to speak, and with protruding lips, only stared back at him over his trembling shoulders as he left. He did not keep still for a moment while Gregor was speaking, but moved steadily towards the door without taking his eyes off of him. It's quite an image. He's not running away full trot. He's making his way to leave, but he's in such shock and horror that he can't turn away. He cannot take his eyes off of it. In the hall, he stretched his right hand out, far out towards the stairway, as if there were some supernatural force waiting to save him. So again, it's very detailed description, and really lends itself to a kind of comic in the slapstick mode behavior. Here's Gregor trying to talk rationally to the chief clerk. Okay, the chief clerk's reaction as he's doing this is, oh my God, and yet he still talks. It's a lengthy speech. He's still trying to ration. And if you look at this as the image of what that looks like, here's this giant beetle, bug, insect, speaking in a very human, rational way, intelligent way, to a man who can't understand him and is drawing backwards, right? It just builds to this level of, again, absurdity.
But I thought that they couldn't understand what he was saying.
They can't.
Exactly. So why would they assume that this is Gregor? Like, I mean, if I was going to my friend's house and picking her up and she opened the door as a cockroach, I wouldn't assume that this is the cockroach. Like, I wouldn't assume that this is her.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. If you go to your friend's house, you open up the door and there's this giant, cockroach. No, your first thought is, am I dreaming? Because there's no such thing. And then run and scream and get out of there. I mean, but of course, they have no reason. I mean, who else could it be? And no, it's a good question, because it's a question that is predicated on rational response. And of course, because the story deals in such irrationality, that as Gregor is trying to be rational in his explanation, the way we respond to the story has to be tempered with the acknowledgement that we are dealing with the fantastic, with the irrational. So there could be a lot of these things that, that logically, that doesn't make sense. Well, logically, no one wakes up transformed into an insect. So it's that.
Thing,
yes, go ahead. Yes.
One thing it's not explained or described here about his face structure. Like, if it's still like human or.
No, it isn't. But I think, given everything that we have seen in terms of the description, they're physically, and it's a great question, because of the discussion about this juxtaposition between the human, what's left of Gregor's humanity, versus this physical transformation, which seems utterly unhuman. All right? Not even animalistic. It's an insect.
Yeah.
It's even more removed.
Because it seems a bit mixture to me, because, like, for example, cockroach, do they really make sound?
Good question.
Because he's making sound and others are like listening as animal's voice. So.
Well, I think this is, again, it speaks to the different translations and what it is in the original German. It is not explicitly said that it's a cockroach. It's vermin in this edition, in this translation that we're looking at. It's an insect. And I think that was very consciously done by the author, Kafka, is to say, it's not really anything that you are aware of, because it can't, because it's a giant, whatever it is. So it seems to be a hybrid of different insects. Right? Arguments in Kafka scholarship, there's much written on what exactly it is meant to represent. But for our intents and purposes, and just the fact that we have multiple translations that we're dealing with here, with the copies that you have, we can see that it's not clear. And that just adds to even greater mystery and greater, eccentricity of what is being experienced here. All right. So, you know, the chief clerk, in what I would argue is a fairly comical, and I think I would argue intentionally, it's hard to escape from it. I mean, even when we think about, you know, how all his little arms are flapping around and things like this, that level of absurdity leads to a certain element of the comic, and that's problematic, as I was saying earlier, because how do we incorporate the comic with something that is seemingly so tragic and so disturbing? A note here, when we see Gregor's father, right, you know, sees the chief clerk stick in his right hand, as I was, the details of what I was describing before, picked up a large newspaper from the table and left, and used it to drive Gregor back into his room, stamping his foot at him as he went. Again, think of a lion tamer or any kind of animal trainer. Nothing would stop Gregor's father as he drove him back, making hissing noises at him like a wild man. Well, that's interesting, right? The description is such. The description is such that now we're getting certain imagery with the father as a wild man. Hissing noises. Okay, that obviously relates to the noises that Gregor makes when he tries to talk. And then we get this whole thing, you know, maybe going, it's so detailed. And if it's detailed, then we really have to take note of it. He wants to get back into his room. His father's trying to get him back into his room. He wants to get back into his room. To make real, he had no choice, as he started to discuss, that he was quite incapable of going backwards in a straight line. So he began as quickly as possible and with frequent anxious glances at his father to turn himself around. And how does his father respond? Right? But perhaps his father was able to see his good intentions, as he did nothing to hinder him. Right? He's giving his father the benefit of the doubt. His father's standing there with a stick and a rolled up newspaper, stomping his feet, trying to shoo him back into his room. He can't walk backwards, so he's going to try to turn around, and his father's not jumping all over him. So Gregor is saying, perhaps my father understands what I'm trying to do. And he sees that as a good thing, seemingly, at this point. Let's just take a look at the chat. So the question is, does Gregor know 100% that they don't understand him? At this point, he may not know 100%. That's a great question. We get the sense from the scene that we were just looking at when he starts explaining himself and starts flattering the clerk. He's doing that. He seems to have forgotten that he can't be understood. And he seems to be doing this in a genuine attempt to be understood, in a genuine attempt to communicate. So no, at this point, and it's understandable, he still hasn't fully absorbed his predicament. We know that as well because he's still talking about getting back to work. All right, and that could relate to just the magnitude of what's transpired here. And at this stage, at this beginning stage, yes, nobody has come to terms with this fully or 100%. So yes, I would say no, he does not know 100% at this point because he's still trying to communicate. Because again, I'm emphasizing this juxtaposition of this insect quality of him versus the human quality where he is rational and in his mind is still very much capable of communication. We have to watch that and see if that changes as the story progresses. And you'll have a better understanding what I'm talking about when you get to the next part of the story. But again, interesting here as a wild man talking about the father, that he's still, seemingly, gentle and trying. Like you said earlier, I have no intention of leaving my family. I'm here to help them. His human side seems quite alert gentle to a certain extent, compassionate, understanding. But his father here is using the tip of the stick to give directions from a distance as to which way to turn. So it's almost like his father's trying to, as the way Gregor is interpreting it, trying to help him take it back into his room. If only his father would stop that unbearable hissing. That hissing. Right? We want to remember that because that's associated directly with his father. And what we know about his father at this point, well, his father is responsible for the debt that they're in, that Gregor is having to take care of the entire family, have to take on that responsibility. And we know as well what? His father takes these hours-long breakfasts. Right? It's developing this picture of who the father is. We want to know that so that we can, again, like with his sister and with the mother, how do they change? Do they change? Do they go through a metamorphosis as well? So it's to get him back into his room. And finally, it's succeeded that he does. Then his father gave him a hefty shove from behind, which released him from where he was held. Again, the comic imagery here of him, he can't get in, he gets stuck, right? He's trying to get back into the room. He's had to turn himself around, this giant insect, the father stomping and guiding him. And finally, the father sends him flying into the room, gives him a heavy push. The door was slammed shut with the stick, and then finally all was quiet. So, a lot going on here. Let's remember we talked about this as well, you know, how the mother is concerned and that he needs a doctor. Right? Again, this is trying to apply rational reactions to something that is irrational, that's beyond the pale. Right? Again, quick at the doctor. Why does she want him to get the doctor? Because did you hear the way Gregor spoke just now? That was the voice of an animal. And remember, towards the beginning, when Gregor recognizes that his voice is strange, he's brushing off what must be the beginnings of a really bad cold. So what we're getting a lot of here in this first section is everyone trying to come to terms with the gravity and the monstrosity and the extraordinariness of the situation. Okay? Questions? So just again to recap, title of the story is Metamorphosis. I'm suggesting strongly that you look not just at the metamorphosis that Gregor goes through, but look carefully at the mother, father, and sister Greta, and whether they're going through transformations. And the only way to be able to observe that is in this section is to try to get a grasp on who they are now. It's the only way that we'll be able to see if there's transformation that ensues. Okay? Note as well the kind of detailed reading I'm doing. I'm encouraging you strongly to read in the same manner. It's going to be important in order to unpack what's fully developing here when we get to talking about the deeper themes and ideas that the story is conveying. All right, for next week, right, part 2. And really try not to fall behind. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to set up the quiz. All right, I'm going to put it into the Omnibox. I'm going to put a 30-minute timer on it. All right, the quiz, as you'll see, is designed to explore how detailed you've done the reading. Okay, before we can get into any kind of real depth regarding the story, you have to be able to follow closely what is transpiring. This is, again, this is Kafka. Okay, so I'm going to stop the recording here because we're going to, no point recording while you do it. So,